On the 18th of August in 2008, 18-year-old Morne Harmse, a matriculant at the Nick Diedrichs Technical High School in Krugersdorp, South Africa, proclaimed to his friends, "Today is the day I will begin with the massacre and the bloodbath. Today is the day that you can get back at those who did bad things to you. Today I'm going to kill people left and right, and when the school bell rings, I'm going to do it." And then, armed with 3 samurai swords, he wielded the katana at the neck of Jacques Pistorius, fatally wounding him. He swiped at Stefan Bauer, wounding him, and he also wounded 2 gardeners, Lesiba Sam Manamela and Chama Joseph Godisan. He was then sentenced to 20 years imprisonment. Now, my guest today is my colleague and the former commander of the Investigative Psychology Section, Brigadier Dr. Gerard Labuschagne. Now, Dr. Labuschagne is a qualified threat assessment professional with the U.S. Association of Threat Assessment Professionals Certified Threat Manager Certification. Gerald, you interviewed Morne 11 years into his sentence. And as a professional threat assessor, you say this tragedy could have been avoided.
Yep. Hi, Micki. Hi, and all the listeners. Yeah, no, sadly, a lot of these mass violence incidences, according to the research that's been done, have pre-incident warning behaviors. And I'm not talking about something that's vague that only makes sense after the effect. I'm talking about communications, whether it's on social media to friends or family, that are quite direct about what they're going to be doing. But the problem is people often don't take it seriously, like their fellow students, or they don't know what to look for, or if they report it to someone, the person they're reporting to hasn't been trained to really understand what this type of information is and how relevant it is. So a lot of the stuff if you think back to times when you've listened to interviews on the news about some mass shooting in America, when somebody would say, well, yeah, he used to post on Facebook X, Y, and Z. There's actually, after the mass shooting at Sandy Hook Primary School all those years ago, there was the Sandy Hook Promise, which is an NGO that was started to help try and publicize all of these issues. And if you go to YouTube and Google Sandy Hook Promise, you'll see a lot of their very sort of informative public service adverts about see something, say something, and how important this information is. That's actually quite a powerful short videos to watch. So in this case, we had that. He was telling people long before the incident that he wants to kill people at school. Not ambiguous, not vague. And again, if there had been a system in place where we at least taught teachers what to look out for, have somebody a bit more trained at a school who could then take it further to look into the situation, I do think that this type of stuff should not have happened. I mean, we saw that earlier last year, I think it was February, in Johannesburg, where a kid went to school and took his dad's gun to school and shot a headmaster, thankfully not fatally. But he had a WhatsApp group where he had been posting the list of people he wanted to shoot. So the big thing is people just don't realize what it is. Then the people that do see it don't know what to do with it and don't know how to interpret it. And the information, that opportunity to intervene before something happens is just lost.
Would this also be then described as leakage? When they voice.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the term that they started to use. Leakage for this pre-incident stuff that's been, as I said, nowadays it'll be on social media. In the old days, it would have just been the person told somebody, said something to their friend. But nowadays, social media is really central to where people, tag something on Facebook, post something on Instagram, or whichever apps that the kids are using nowadays. So that's often where we find this leakage stuff being made available long before the incident.
You also say in this wonderful book of yours, The Profiler Diaries 2, From Crime Scene to Courtroom, that school massacres are the end products of targeted violence. It starts with a grievance or so.
Yeah, so that's also why we have this pre-incident leakage and other behaviors that are observable behaviors. So, we typically say that when someone's planning to do a violent act towards another person, the targeted violence, we often get these phases that most people, and it doesn't matter what your motive is, go through. And it starts off with a grievance, something that I'm unhappy about. In this case, it was, pretty much what we can figure out, it was him feeling like bullied and rejected at school. In the Virginia Tech shooting, if you go look at those videos that are available online of his little video manifesto, he's very critical about all these snobbish people at school who think they're better than him, and etc., and rich and good looking and so superficial. That was his grievance. So it starts with the grievance, and we all have grievances. That's nothing unique. But for this person, the next step is violence is my solution to this grievance. And then once you've made that decision, you start to take the next step, which is sort of planning, like how would I do this? And that's often the sort of the cognitive process. You might even find Google searching about how to build a bomb or best way to kill lots of people. That's a thinking process about how would I put this plan into action. And then after that, once you've got your plan, you start to do practical things. So you go and buy the swords, or you go and buy a gun, or you buy bullets, you go and practice with your firearm, so observable external behaviors. And then kind of the next phase is specifically if it's a place you're not familiar with. Let's say your grievance was with the mayor of the city. Most of us have never been to the mayor's office. So what happens is the person, it might be the day before, a week before, will go and check out what the security looks like at the mayor's office. Where is it, firstly? Is there security? Where is the actual inside the building? Where is the mayor's office? Is it on the 10th floor? And does a little bit of a reconnaissance so that when they go there the final time, so the breaching is the second last stage before the actual attack. And that's kind of this consistently seen in these scenarios, the sort of pathway to targeted violence. And that's observable stuff, and leakage fits into that. And that's why we're saying if we have people that are properly taught what to look for, they can sometimes pick up these little bits of information and say, I think something's going on here. We need to take a closer look.
Yes, that's your observable behavior that he manifests. But what about the violent ideation? That we can't really see. It's his thought process, and I know there's behavior that links to it. But I remember in your book you said that Dr. Franco Visser said something more. I went to become a soldier or something, and he saw these students as terrorists. Do you think that's what you describe as this consuming violent ideation?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a bit difficult to say because someone's interested in, I think he said he was interested in the military and SWAT tactics. I mean, a lot of kids are, so one doesn't want to start to think that everybody has those interests are, going to do something horrible later on. But again, it's not uncommon to find people who end up engaging in mass violence to have some kind of interest in military stuff, policing type of stuff. Now, would that have been enough to raise suspicions back then? Probably not. He was interested in horror movies. Well, so lots of people are. So it's kind of stuff, that kind of stuff is a bit more vague. But he did, for example, say he imagined the kids at school were terrorists, and I fantasized about attacking them. So again, if he's communicating that to other people, whether it's maybe in a writing, in an essay at school, or again, this is where the leakage comes back, telling people about his violent thoughts. So that's where you can pick up the violent stuff. It doesn't always necessarily just stay sort of internally in his skull. When it comes out, it becomes the leakage that we often refer to.
And when you interviewed him, what did he tell you? What was his motive? What did he want to accomplish through this whole thing?
Well, basically said that ultimately what he wanted to achieve is to be killed by the police or go to jail forever. And quite frankly, he didn't achieve either of those back then or now because he's out, as you probably know. So, and it was, he did say, today you can get your revenge for all the people who've done things to you. So for him, it does seem like the issue of bullying was one of his key motives. Now, if the interviews that they did with a lot of the school kids, and I must say the investigating officer really did a good, thorough job. He interviewed quite a lot of the teachers and the kids at school, and most of them say, but he wasn't really bullied. But the point is, it's more about his perception. You could have been bullied once or twice and just have felt this internalized, I'm a bullied kid, everybody else is mean. So it doesn't matter whether objectively he was or wasn't. It's about what did Morne feel. Did he feel rejected by the broader society, the other kids at school? So he might have had his sort of 3 or 4 buddies that he would hang out every day with. But is he feeling like a kid who is targeted for bullying or that is seen as lesser? He was quite a small kid for his age, and that might have just been his own internalized view of himself as being, not adequate, etc. So definitely he verbalized bullying. Was it necessarily objectively bullying? Perhaps not, but that's almost irrelevant. He felt that he was this kid who needed to take revenge against people who against the school because of what he felt was done to him. Now, interesting, the people he attacked, none of them have done anything to him. They weren't people that had been known to be bullying towards him or unkind towards him. So that's often what we see in these mass incidences. You're angry at the place and maybe some particular individuals, but you don't necessarily actually attack the individuals. You attack people who happen to be at the place at the time. So the same thing with the Virginia Tech shooting. He didn't target any of the people that had opened up a disciplinary case against him. He didn't target his lecturer. He didn't target the girls that he'd approached ineffectively, and then they called the cops to get him to leave him alone, to leave them alone. Didn't target any of them. He just targeted kids who happened to be in the school, in the university at the time when he went on his shooting.
Yeah. When you said, he was small, one is surprised when you see his photograph. He is actually he was a very small boy. Reminds me of the actor that played in the television series Adolescence. They
Yeah,
innocent
he's small
about
and
them.
kind of pathetic looking. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so when you saw him in prison, what was his record or his behavior in prison?
Not good. I mean, he had not performed and done well. He'd regularly have his privileges category downgraded because of he would set fire to his cell. He would fight with sort of almost unnecessarily pick fights with people and then get his ass beaten because he's a very tiny guy. He would paint on the wall in sort of blood. He was regularly using drugs. I mean, I think even up until the time when he was discharged, he was using dacha and other more heavier drugs. So he was always in trouble. He had kind of some low-level gang involvement, but I mean, he was such a pathetic guy. I think he was more just a hanger-on than any sort of real contributing gang member. So no, he was a terrible guy. I mean, in the 11 years that he was in prison, he never once, remember, this crime occurred when he was in August of his matric year. Now, he wasn't going to pass the matric year. That's the other thing. His grades had been going downhill for the 4 years up to that point. He didn't even bother in the 11 years that he was in prison to finish his matric. He kind of maybe worked for, I think, 6 weeks in the upholstery factory in the prison, and then and basically just sat in his ass for 11 years and did nothing.
Yeah.
So didn't do well, didn't participate. And that's partly one of the reasons why we said this guy's not a good candidate for rehabilitation. I mean, to be released, because he actually has more warning, he had more risk factors by the time he left. Besides that, also, in this time in prison, he developed some very severe mental health issues. All that was all prevalent, and which wasn't even prevalent back then in the time of the crime. So, but they were present now. So things were actually worse. And again, as I said in the beginning, his motive was to die or go to prison for the rest of his life. Well, he's now about to be released from prison, or he was back then.
Yeah.
So even that stated goal in the end, he didn't achieve. So I was very, very against and unhappy with the fact that he was ultimately released on. And the two correctional service psychologists were just as adamant that he should not be released.
Yes, well, this is, I was quite shocked when I read this in, the postscript in this chapter in your book, where you said, he was only supposed to come out, on parole in 2029 or something. And then I read in your book as a postscript on the 4th of March in 2022, the parole board released him into his parents' care.
Yeah.
Despite all of us, it's just where they say that despite our professional inputs, that some layperson, still think they know better.
Yeah. Yeah, so his term of imprisonment would have fully expired in 2029. Because remember, he only got 20 years because of his age and the judge felt his immaturity, and probably because he pled guilty. That also helped. So if he was a bit older, if he was a year or two older, he would have got a life sentence, at least for the confirmed murder, and probably 15 or more years at least for each of the attempted. So, he was very lucky. Well, lucky, I mean, that's just how it was. So, he by the time we get to 2029, what's that, 4 years from now, we can't even monitor him anymore. We can't even ask where he's staying, where's he going, does he have a job? We can't check in on him because once your sentence in total has expired, the government has no right to sort of, keep tabs on you.
But now the moment that he is in parole, they can.
Yeah, so there will be conditions. Yeah, absolutely, you're right. There'll be conditions about what he can do. Can he drink? Can he go out at night? When does he have to be home? Who can he associate with? And of course, hopefully those are monitored. And of course, if he breaks those conditions, theoretically, he can find himself right back in prison until he qualifies again for parole at some point.
What do you think his life would be right now?
He was a guy who, in my opinion, back then had absolutely no motivation. Even speaking to him, it was like really kind of had to pull the words out of him. And I think that I asked, I think he basically said he's going to just sit at home and watch TV, really. I think that was his real ambition. He's not a guy, he just doesn't have that vibe in him to say, well, I'm going to get a job and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. To just basically, I'm just going to go home. That's literally the extent of his plans. and probably quite nice. That's what he's doing, sitting on his backside watching Netflix or something.
Yeah, or YouTube, and I'm sure it's not Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs that he's watching. You know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean,
But I must say, he had very supportive parents. I mean, throughout the years, they've stood by his side. They visited him. I did interview them when I saw them, and I really got the feeling that they did care for him, and that they were looking forward to him coming home. But I don't know if they quite understood the gravity of the situation. But that's one positive. If you've got parents that are, keen to be there for you, and that's very helpful. That's a very definitely positive aspect. But yeah, I'm not too sure. I'd love to go and speak to them now and find out how it's going. And I mean, it's great if it's going well.
Yeah.
It's just you kind of one of those situations where you feel every day, if you hear on the news that he'd been arrested for killing a family member or somebody else, I wouldn't be at all surprised.
Yes, and one wonders, when something like that happens, not just with Morne, but with anybody else that's been released on parole, people whom both you and I know are very dangerous people. That who's going to take responsibility for that? You sort of
Yeah, not the parole board, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. They were ostracized and they were rejected. You become part of a community in prison, even if it's a gang community. And then when you're out and people know who you are and what you did, again, the community around you will ostracize you and reject you. So you get that whole cycle. How long is it then going to take for somebody, to build up all the resentment and the grievance again?
And at least prison is structure. Now he comes out and there's what structure is there on him? As I said, he's going to just float around and do what? I don't know, because you're definitely not going to finish his matric now if he didn't try and finish it in 11 years of being in prison. It does make me very nervous about him.
Yes, makes me very nervous about a few people as well. So, okay. Gerard, thank you very, very much. And for our interview, it's always interesting talking to you. And as you know, you and I often talk behind the scenes.
Yeah, we do.
Sharing many opinions. But to our viewers as well, if you'd like to become a Patreon member, then please join our Patreon community, because we're carrying on with the interview on our Patreon community. So please join our Patreon.